Hi everyone, welcome. Over here beneath this paper bag and beneath this sheet of newspaper rests my worm bin with the so-called mixed population of worms living in it. And the mixed population of worms is kind of a popular arrangement where you've got three breeds of worms living together: Indian blue worms, European night crawlers, and red wigglers. And to what degree they are in here in terms of concentrations of this type of worm or that type of worm, I really don't know. But that's what I assume lives in here. This system is now just one day over 38 weeks of age. I believe it's 267 days of age. And I'm going from memory here because I didn't write anything down before I came down here, but I believe there's been 22 feedings till now. And our feedings have been done in a way that's been attempting to reduce the numbers of these little springtails you see running around here. All these little white specks are actually springtails. And to me, I think the number of these little guys in here is just a little bit more than I like. A lot of people comment when they see these videos and kind of object to the very notion of trying to reduce or eliminate the numbers of springtails. So, I feel bad because I feel like people are just getting me all wrong. I do have a worm farm and I'm composting here with worms, and it's all about the worms. And out of all my systems, this is the only place where I'm seeing this sort of an outbreak of springtails. So I'm not like trying to eliminate every springtail I ever see. It's just in this one system where I feel like they've really kind of gotten out of hand, and I'd like to reduce their numbers to something a little bit more normal for a typical worm bin. So, if you're one of those pro springtail advocates who's really bothered by me taking measures to try to reduce their numbers, then, please don't try to take it personally, or, please try to understand, at least from my point of view, what I'm trying to achieve here. If I really wanted to, I'm sure I could, maybe raise springtails for whatever purpose, but I really see myself as raising worms, and I do, tolerate some deviation in terms of what's living in my worm bins as far as helper creatures being there, and springtails are always a welcome guest. They're not seen as an invasive creature or a bad participant in the composting process. I do recognize and appreciate their value in a worm bin, but it doesn't change the fact that, regardless of all the feedback I've gotten so far, it doesn't change the fact that I'm still very interested in seeing this as being much more worms and much less springtails. So we've been trying to use neem. So I've got some neem seed oil, and I've got this neem cake here too. And I don't know, I was kind of going on something that I thought might help here, which was that I thought neem had the potential to help reduce the numbers of certain types of insects in a worm bin. And whether or not springtails are even on that list of creatures that can be controlled with the neem, I don't know. Although I'm sure if it was a complete mismatch here, if I was barking up the wrong tree, I'm sure somebody would have pointed that out to me by now, because we've been doing this for a number of weeks now, ever since we started to really get the sense that the springtail population in here is well beyond what a typical worm bin would normally have in it. So we've just been pressing on with applying the neem. So I figured I would continue with that. And before we finish over on this far end of the bin where we've not been feeding whatsoever, this is what I'm considering as sort of the finished castings end of the system. And we're going to work our way over eventually to the other side, which is where I've been applying the feedings. I figured as long as we're already done tilling up this side, perhaps we could just go ahead and sprinkle a little bit of this neem cake in here too. I don't think I'm going to bother today with, trying to get out the neem seed oil. I think we'll just try a little dusting here and there of the neem cake throughout the bin, and then include it with the feeding that they're going to get on the opposite side of the bin. And we'll just, keep hoping for the best. At this point, I'm probably leaning more towards the likelihood that drying of the material in the system might be what would eventually help reduce the numbers of the mites. Not to say that this system is exceedingly damp from my point of view. I mean, it's really no more damp than most of my systems are. In fact, I'm sure I've got other systems that are even more damp, so hopefully that doesn't mean I'm going to eventually start seeing outbreaks of springtails in those other systems too. But it does seem to me like, drying here could potentially be one possible way to get the numbers of the springtails to drop here. At least a little bit would be nice. If you've been following along, the backstory with this population of worms is that they used to live in a much smaller little green container, perhaps half the size of this box here. And we moved them into this somewhat larger container when we felt like they had already increased their population and made it enough to warrant giving them increased space to live in because of their increased numbers. Way back when we first launched off this system, like I always do, I always try to turn to the viewers to give me their input on how many worms they believe they observed when I launched the system. And then based on everyone's guesstimates of how many worms occupy a system, I usually put that into the record. And believe it or not, when we first started this system, we only had done so with an estimated worm population of 36 worms. Just 3 dozen worms were what we estimated to be the starting population of this system here. And you could pretty much tell every time I scoop up a handful of material, not only am I getting castings and springtails, but I'm also getting a good number of worms. So you gotta admit, it's pretty good progress. What those original 38 occupants of this system have done over time. And over that time, I don't know how many generations of additional baby worms have grown big enough to have babies of their own. Nor do I know the lifespan of any of the worms that occupy this system. But who knows? We could have, babies and moms and dads and grandparents and great-grandparents, and I don't know how many generations of worms living in here of various types. So let's just not forget we're trying to mix in a little bit of neem here and there as we go along. And then perhaps at the end I can also just give the whole system a little dusting of this stuff. And I don't know, I kind of reversed what I'm doing here now. Originally I was starting to stack up all the finished castings high on this side, leaving the feeding end of the bin kind of much lower in height. And it feels like I'm kind of going through a similar sort of nudging of the material from one end of the bin to the other. And I just feel like I gotta repeat that the moisture level in here, I gotta say, does not feel exceedingly wet. It does feel like this stuff is all pretty loose and crumbly and at a moisture level that's about right for worms to be living in. So whether I even feel comfortable going much drier on this stuff, I don't know. But for the present time, at least for now, we're continuing with the drying of the material as being one of the main countermeasures we're attempting to reduce springtail numbers. So I will be continuing to cover up without plastic. The last check-in 10 days ago was actually the day when we made the decision to try adopting the drying approach to see if we can get the springtail numbers reduced in here a little bit. So in addition to using the neem like we've been doing for a few weeks now, we also implemented the first try at allowing the system to basically lose some of its moisture to evaporation by covering only with paper products. And we'll do the same here again today when we cover up. Let's just make sure we get their feeding in here first, and then we'll pretty much be done. I don't know if anyone's got any other ideas on what to do. I did get one suggestion from one of my viewers, which jives with one of the ideas I was already having on my own too, which was to just try to separate the worms from the castings, possibly just using sort of a light separation approach or something along those lines, and then basically give the worms literally a bath in an effort to separate them from the springtails, so that they can maybe be relaunched into a nice new fresh system, and possibly be free of the springtails. You know, not that the springtails are really doing any harm or causing any major concern here amongst the worms. I think they actually work pretty well together, but I do feel like I prefer having a worm bin that's more worms than springtails, and that's just what I'm driving at here. So before we rebuild the feeding area, I'm just going to go ahead and make sure we've laid in a little bit more of this neem cake, but at this point the neem cake's really almost going in as a food supplement, not so much as sort of a natural insecticide, because this stuff is all natural. A lot of people even say that the worms gobble the stuff right up when it's given to the worms, so I'm not surprised. Definitely a nice bite-sized type material. And you know, worms, they're not awfully discriminate. They pretty much gobble up anything that has the potential to eventually just decompose on its own anyway. Alright, so that's pretty much our feeding right there. A day's worth of coffee rested on top of a couple coffee filters, just to make sure we're including that, you know, little bit of carbon source in there alongside the food supply. Those 2 coffee filters should suffice for that. And what I'm sprinkling in now is just a little bit of my worm chow too. It's just a variety of different stuff like birdseed and who knows whatever, a little bit of flour. Anything I got laying around usually makes its way into the worm chow. It does seem like I'm starting to run pretty low. I might have to whip up another batch of this stuff soon. So I think that's pretty much where we're at in terms of tending to our worm bin, where it's almost not even just a worm bin anymore. It's almost like a springtail bin. But I'd really like for it to just go back to being just a worm bin again one of these days. Those look pretty cool, kind of like a coffee burrito. I guess I'll bring back a little bit of this material just so we can get the food in the feeding zone covered back up, and at the same time we're sort of just blending in this neem cake or neem meal, whatever. And I think as just a finishing step before we replace the paper coverings, I'm just going to give this whole thing a nice little sprinkling, because, you know, I don't even know how much longer this neem cake is going to last. I really don't have much more. This supply is really starting to run a little bit low. I don't even know if I would go out of my way to buy any more of this stuff. I can't really point to this stuff as being the silver bullet that resulted in some sort of a success story so far. But I'm just trying different things and hoping for a good outcome. So let's get the coverings back on here, kind of the way we found them. They're doing a good enough job that I could sense that they are allowing for some moisture to exit the system by being on here pretty thoroughly, covering almost all edges. It is limiting the loss of moisture to a pretty slow pace, so that we don't just suddenly sort of shock dry the entire top surface. This way the worms can continue to come to the surface and feed and hang out and hopefully eat more of that neem and enjoy it, while at the same time perhaps the springtails don't enjoy it so much, and it helps reduce their numbers. So I continue to keep my fingers crossed and patiently wait for a good outcome here, but I might have to resort to some other measures and a different strategy at some point if the neem and drying doesn't help, so we'll have to see. But that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated, and if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.